Well, if you stuck with us this long, you've made it to the gluing station. And the gluing section of this project is going to be one of the more complicated and intimidating parts of the project. As woodworkers, we get a lot of practice cutting and shaping and sanding boards, but we don't get a lot of practice gluing, especially because every time you glue up a project, it's going to be a little different than the last. And so we've spent a lot of time and effort getting to this point. And it's a very easy part of the project to screw up. So you want to make sure that you practice this once before you actually go ahead and glue. Now, I've done this project hundreds of times, so I'm not going to do a dry fit, but what I would highly recommend is that you go through and you clamp this just the same way I'm clamping it in this video, with no glue first, just to make sure that you've done the process and you understand it and you realize how things are going to work. And then when you glue, you only have 2 minutes or so for most of the glues to set up. Some are a little bit longer, but in general, 2 minutes is kind of the working time of the glue. So you want to have everything set up, ready to go. Make sure all your clamps are adjusted, everything's been loosened, and it's all ready so that as you move through this process, you can do it quickly and efficiently. Now, it's very easy to screw up the glue stage. One of the common things I see is people will glue one of these upside down, and so they'll have the rabbet on 3 sides, and then there's no rabbet on the 4th side, and you can't put your bottom or tops together. So what I like to do to idiot-proof this stuff is get everything together just like you want it to go, and then I simply just lay it down exactly in the spot where it's going to go. So let's go ahead and go through and glue this thing, and I'll show you how to do it. We're going to start with the end grains. End grains always soak up the most amount of glue. That's the part of the tree that pulls water up through the tree. So the end grain is going to pull in most of the glue, so always start with that, and you're going to put a little bit more glue on the end grain than you would put on the edge grain. I'll show you that as we go. So one end grain's done. I got to move through and do the other ones real quick. Keep some paper towels by you, you're going to need it. And this kind of an art form is gluing, and it's just something you get with experience. There's a perfect amount of glue to put on every project, and the only way to get that perfect amount is through experience. If you put too much on, it oozes out everywhere and makes a giant mess. If you put too little on, the project's not going to be strong and the joint will fail. So you get kind of practice the more you do this thing. I've gotten pretty good over the years with this project, but I'll tell you, sometimes I build it, I still put too much glue on it and I get squeezed out. So it's not, you know, it's not something that's easy to get. It takes some skill and experience to get. This is a nice simple project, so it's a good start to figuring out all this stuff. So I've got all of mine glued now, and I'm going to go ahead and put it together. Just make sure everything fits the way it should. Make sure that rabbet is exactly in the position it's supposed to be in. All right, very nice. Again, remember I'm working on a timeline because I only got a few minutes before this glue sets up. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one clamp here, and this clamp is just going to hold it into place. It's just gently secure it so that I can work with all my other clamps. Okay, it just holds it in place. It's not tight. So now I'll go ahead and start moving around this project and putting clamps exactly where I need them. And that spot is going to be directly where I want the pressure. So in other words, wherever the joints come together, that's where I'm going to want my clamps. And I'm just going to put a couple on here. They're just snugged up, just kind of holding it in position. And I want to go around my project and look for any cracks. If there's any cracks, I know I'm going to have to add more clamps there. So mine's looking pretty good right here. And I'm going to go ahead and start adding the last clamps onto it. If you have a project that the clamps are really big and heavy, you can always alternate the clamps each direction so that they kind of counterbalance each other. This case, I don't think I'm going to have that problem, but you could do that if you need to. Okay, I've got all the clamps in place, and I'm going around looking and making sure that there's no cracks anywhere. And on my box, I can see a little bit of glue squeeze out in every direction, and that's usually pretty good. That's what you want. You want to see just a little bit of glue squeeze out. That tells you you have enough glue on your project. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten this one down because just by sheer luck, it looks like it came out pretty good. Now I do see one tiny little crack here I don't like, and so I'm going to add one extra clamp just to squeeze that crack out of there. So I'll loosen this back up so it'll shift a little and tighten it down. All right, and that seems good. And now I'm just going to go around, working my way around each of the clamps and just kind of tighten a little here, a little there, and just keep working myself around and tighten all the clamps nice and even. And they should have a pretty snug fit on them. You should be cranking them pretty tight. All right, I think I'm going to remove this just so the camera can catch the last step. Now, I think I've got this thing all clamped up and glued just the way I want, but there's one very, very critical step, and that is to make sure that everything is square. So with any luck, this will come out not square, so I can show you how to fix it. Whenever I want to show one, it always comes out perfect. Let's see how this one came out. So I'm going to put my tiny little square in here, and I want to see if it's perfectly square or not. Now, this one I can see there's a little bit of an air gap right here, which tells me that that board is back a little bit and I need to pull it this way. So if I clamp a clamp diagonally here, it will pull it back into the direction I need. So this one's not off very much, so I don't know if you'll even be able to see it moving on the camera, but it is off a little bit, and so we're going to fix that right now. I get this kind of snugged into place so it holds itself, and then with my third hand I'm going to put this square in here and check it for square. Now all I'm going to do is keep squeezing this thing very slowly until this comes out perfectly square, and it looks like with just that little bit it's perfectly square. Sometimes I squeeze it just a hair more because when it dries it'll spring back just a little bit, so I usually just over crank it just the tiniest little bit. Not so much it takes it back out of square, but just a little bit more than what it does to put it into the position. Okay? And now I've got a perfectly clamped and square box. So I'm going to have to let this thing sit for at least 40 minutes in clamps, and it's best to let it go for 24 hours. So once this thing's dry, I'll see you back. Of course, in the magic of YouTube land, I'll be back in a second. But for me, I'm going to go grab some lunch and wait for this thing to dry. Now that we're ready to glue the top on, we just have a couple of things to consider before we do. Very first thing you want to do is sand both faces of the top. That will make it easier in the future. If I glue this on and then I have to sand down in there, that's going to be a pain in the neck to get my sander down in there. So anything we can pre-sand, we want to pre-sand. So I've got both faces of the top sanded. I want to figure out which side I like better, and then I'm going to place it so that I don't get confused. I'm going to put a little dab of glue all around the edge here. The trick is to get enough glue that it completely covers the surface, but not so much glue that it oozes out over the sides. We'd prefer to not have any glue cleanup that we need to deal with. I've also got a scrap board that I'm going to put under so that when I clamp onto this, I don't have to put my clamp right on the very small edge of the rabbet. Okay, if I put it there, sometimes it will dent the board. So I just have a piece of scrap board that I found in the bin that will help me clamp without that kind of extra force. So we'll go ahead and get started on the gluing. Again, the trick is just enough glue, but not so much. Keep a rag next to you so you can wipe off any extra. I put a little extra on just so that you could see me deal with the extra. So this will happen. Even when you get good at gluing, you'll still have times where you put on too much glue. And that's okay, it's not a big deal. You just want to take care of it before you get it all clamped up so that it doesn't ooze into your project. So just keep a rag close, and I'm just going to go around and wipe up all the extra glue. Try to keep it from falling over the edge. If it does fall over the edge, in fact, I'll try to get it on camera here what I do. Okay, let's zoom you in here a little. So I don't know how well it'll appear over camera here, but I'm gonna ooze a little over the edge here. So now it's dropping on this backside. If that's the case, take one of your fingers that's clean and just kind of catch it before it runs down the side, and that way you'll keep it from having little glue streaks. Remember, the reason you don't want the glue to ooze over the side is because once the glue dries, it will penetrate into the wood and make the stain not be able to penetrate. So it'll act as a shield and keep the stain from going into it. So now I've got it glued and ready to go. I'm going to put my top on it just the way I want it. And then I'll put the bottom board, which is just to help me with clamps. Now, remember, we do need to have wood sticking out all the way around. It's kind of an odd setup. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but you'll see why we do it later on. It's a real cool way of doing things. Just make sure there's at least a little bit of wood all the way around the edge. Okay, and now we can go ahead and clamp this down. As with all of our clamping jobs, we want to start either in the center and work our way to the sides, or work on a side and go all the way across to the other side. So first couple clamps, I'm just snugging up. Okay, so I've got 4 clamps on it right now. I wanted to change angles so you could get a little bit better view. So I've got 4 clamps on it right now. This may be enough, or I may need more, we'll see. But for right now, I've got them all just kind of snug, like they're barely holding themselves in place. I'm gonna go ahead and start at one side and then start cranking it down. I'm not gonna go all the way, but I want it to be fairly tight. And then I'm going to go across to the other side and do the same thing. And what I'd like is to clamp this down, clamp, 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 and that way it spreads the stress out and will lay the board down nice and flat. Sometimes if you don't do that, what happens is you'll clamp the sides. It's hard to move on that piece. But if you clamp the sides, sometimes it'll leave a little bump in the middle, and we don't want that. So you're trying to clamp the stresses out of the board, not use the clamps to add stress to the boards. So again, we'll start on one side and work our way to the other. And in our case, we got pretty lucky. We didn't actually need other clamps. I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. Yeah, it's not looking like we're gonna need any more. So now that I've gotten them all tight, I just go around and kind of crank them down. You're not using all of your strength to do this, but you do want to get a nice firm clamp on them. Remember, the glue sets under pressure, so you want to make sure that it's clamped. Okay, now what I was talking about is, once you get those clamps on, you need to go around the edge. Make sure I'm in camera here. You want to go around the edge of your box and make sure that there's no cracks anywhere in your box. And if you see a crack anywhere, you want to clamp this down, because that means it's not pressing tight against it. So as I go around here, I got lucky. You usually don't get quite this lucky where just 4 clamps do it. But in my case, it looks pretty good. I do see a little bit of a crack right here, so I'm going to add 1 more clamp just to get rid of that crack.
Say what? You got a copy?
And then in this case, it popped right out and it squeezed it tight. You can see the little bit of glue squeezing out there. So in my case, I was okay. Sometimes you will have to loosen the other clamps, tighten this one, and then go back and tighten those just to make sure you got rid of the crack. But in our case, this came out very simple. It's an easy operation in general, and that's what you're going to be doing when you clamp the top on.